Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. बहुत ऊंचा है. Jayom Vishnupad Paramhansa Paribrajacharya Stotara Satashi Shrimad A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnavrinda Ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Prem Sakho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaur Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai. Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinatha Shama Kunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhan Ki Jai. Shri Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai. Mayapur Dham Ki Jai. Jagannath Puri Ki Jai. Tulsi Maharani Ki Jai. Bhakti Devi Ki Jai. Samaveda Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Shri Shri Guru and Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Today we're reading from Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita, Volume 1, Chapter 10, This Momentous Hour. So we have some preliminary studies to do here because we're at a very crucial time in Prabhupada's life. It's a 5-year period from 1960 to 1965. And this picture is Srila Prabhupada at Chippiwada. And you'll see in front of him 3 books. So this picture was taken in 1965 after Srila Prabhupada completed his 3 volumes of the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. And afterwards, there's a little description here. I'm going to read it because, you see, we can't take everything just chronologically. We have to see how Prabhupada reflects on this time, and then we can understand it better. So Prabhupada was in Washington, D.C. in America. It was 1976, and he was remembering these times. So he said, Krishna's mercy is for everyone. It is not restricted to a certain community or class of people. No. Anyone can take advantage of Krishna consciousness. Therefore, in India, the Mayavadis say that I am killing Hindu Dharma. That Bhaktivedanta Swami Hindu Dharma ka nast. This Karpaji is our neighbor. He used to be our neighbor across the street. He was a Mayavadi who very much opposed Srila Prabhupada's preaching to the Westerners and making Brahmins out of non-birth Brahmins. They are against me. They are big, big men. What can be done? Here in America also, Christians are not very happy with me. And there, Hindus are not happy. So where shall I go? And Prabhupada starts to laugh. I cannot stay here, neither in India. This is my position. Neither in my temple. This is my position. Not India, nor America, nor Europe, not any place. So, Narada Muni Bhajaya Vina, just like Narada Muni, always traveling, always traveling. If Krishna wants, so now he's remembering this time. In old age, I was living a retired life in Vrindavan. He asked me, get out, go to America. So I came. At the age of 70 years, actually, nobody goes out of home. But Krishna asked me, get out and go. So I came. And although I have got the best temple in Vrindavan, that's our temple here, I cannot live there. Why he can't? If he just lives here, then how will the rest of the temples go on? Prabhupada had to be constantly traveling once he started the Krishna consciousness movement. But a fighting soldier is honored by the government. Maybe he dies, he is recognized by the government. Here is a soldier, laid down his life by fighting. So we prefer that life. We shall die fighting with Maya. And this is exactly the way Prabhupada lived his life. At the age of 70, he left his comfortable place here in Vrindavan. Nobody goes out at age 70 to start preaching. No money, no followers, nothing. And then, not only that, even when Prabhupada could not sit up by himself, could not walk, could not eat, he still insisted on going out and preaching. And he got in the car, they laid Prabhupada down in the back seat of the car, went to the airport, he flew to London, and he was ready to do another world tour in that condition. So this is Srila Prabhupada. Where's the page down? So where's page down? Ah, here. All right, okay. So this is the upstairs where Prabhupada lived at Chippiwada. Has anyone here ever been to Chippiwada? Do you know which door it is? No. Okay, one of the doors here. Because Prabhupada, the last time he was there was in 1967. We heard about when he took Achyutananda there, and they were staying there for some time after Prabhupada recovered from his stroke and heart attacks. So after that, the rooms were all closed up. And then after some time, Prabhupada, for 37 years, they negotiated. And finally, the rooms were given to, the whole temple was given to ISKCON. So, when they finally got the key to the room and opened it, this is the condition that they found Prabhupada's belongings in his room. We don't know if, because they had the key, Krishna Pandit and his family, we don't know if this was all Prabhupada's things, but this is what the room looked like when the first time the devotees opened up the room. You see all of these bedding. Prabhupada didn't sleep in beds like this, so it's very doubtful that all of these things were Srila Prabhupada's, these fold-up plastic bedding. They also found very old books in Sanskrit. Now, whether these books were Srila Prabhupada's or they were Subhadra, who was the guru who used to, that room was made for her, and Prabhupada used to refer to her books. So they found very ancient books there. And today, when we're studying the Lilamrita, most of it is the memories of Krishnadas Pandit. So we'll hear that later. I just wanted to put a picture so we remember who we're speaking about. Now, at first, Prabhupada was just handwriting. And then later, there were two typewriter companies in the area of Chippiwada, and he found a very small typewriter. Now, unless you're over 50 years old, you probably never used a typewriter. But this is how we used to write all of the books. Everything was done by typewriter. There were no computers before the 1980s. So Prabhupada did all of his typing on just a small typewriter like this. Now, since ISKCON has taken over the temple, just as all ISKCON temples, the standard has come up so beautifully of Radha Vallabha. So I have a few pictures here of the beautiful manner in which they're now being worshipped in the temples. Very beautiful standard. And from that room that we saw, this is how the devotees have fixed it up. This is, you see the same picture that we started with behind Prabhupada. It's probably the only picture we have of Prabhupada at Chippiwada. And then they made a beautiful asan with Murti of Prabhupada. They put marble flooring. And every once in a while they change. Sometimes Prabhupada's playing harmonium, sometimes he's writing, like that. So it's very high standard now. The devotees are taking such good care of the rooms. Now we're going to a different section. Here in Prabhupada's house, because wherever Prabhupada went, he would take the Srimad Bhagavat in Bengali so that he could continue his translating. And this is the last volume that Prabhupada was traveling with. This starts out with Canto 10, the latter chapters of Canto 10, about 10:8, and it goes on through 11, and it might go on to 12. I only saw up to 11. So this book is in Srila Prabhupada's room. But every time we touch the book, the paper just disintegrates. It's so old. Even though we've had it deacidified, the devotees from the archives came, it's so old. So I took these books out only once. And I took as many pictures as I could to share them with you today. I won't take them out again because every time we touch them, they get in worse and worse condition. So this was the Srimad Bhagavat that was printed by Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. And inside, this is how Srila Prabhupada created his purports. On the top here, everything is in Bengali. Even the Sanskrit is written in Bengali. So on the top is the Bhagavatam sloka. Now this particular sloka here is 10:8. It's about when Mother Yasoda saw the whole universe in Krishna's mouth and she started to wonder, am I dreaming? No, I'm not dreaming because I see myself. So this first sloka here is the Sanskrit sloka in Bengali. Directly below that comes Sridhar Swami's commentary that all of the Gaudiya Vaishnavas first referred to. And then after that comes the commentary by Sanatana Goswami called Vaishnava Toshani. Now these commentaries, these tikas, are available now in English. When we give our Srimad Bhagavatam classes, we refer to these commentaries to get more and more information about each sloka. So Prabhupada would refer to first Sridhar Swami's, then Sanatana Goswami's, then there's a very voluminous Sandarbha written by Jiva Goswami. It's a commentary on the entire Srimad Bhagavatam. It's called Krama Sandarbha. And then after that comes Vishwanath Chakravarti's Tika. And then at the very bottom, the biggest part, is the Bengali translation and purport. I don't know whether, because this is, the last volume, the other volumes are all in Bombay, I believe, in Prabhupada's rooms in Bombay. So I don't know whether this translation is written by Bhaktivinoda Thakur or by Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. But it is with these tikas that Prabhupada created his Bhaktivedanta purports by first referring and then taking the information in the slokas up to date. This is the front cover of the first volume of Srimad Bhagavatam. And you'll see here Prabhupada only writes A.C. Bhaktivedanta on the cover. Now later, Prabhupada, he designed the cover with the spiritual world, Goloka Vrindavan, Sveta Dweep, and all of the Vaikuntha planets, and then the Mahatattva in a corner. But originally this is the way the Bhagavatams looked, and this is the way we received them. When you open up the Bhagavatam, now of course the first Bhagavatam that Prabhupada printed, he didn't have any appreciations or any acknowledgments, nothing like that, because it was the first book that he printed. So he immediately gave his dedication to Srila Prabhupada Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj, my spiritual master, on the 26th annual ceremony of his disappearance day. So we know that in 1937, January 1st, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati left this world. So you add 26, it was 1962, because the first year you don't count as the disappearance festival, the next year you count. So it's 1937 plus 25 years. So in 1962, Srila Prabhupada published his first book. Prabhupada took sannyas in 59, and then straight away he went into the publication of this first book. And then he writes on the bottom, he lives forever by his divine instructions, and the follower lives with him. This is the back side of that page. You can see a little bit. The paper was very thin. And also the devotee, this particular volume, it belonged to Vishal Das. Vishal Das, he left this world about a year ago here. And then Vishal Das gave this volume to our temple president, the very first temple president we had in this temple, Akshayananda Swami. So here it just has, Prabhupada had not yet gotten copyright for this. And then Prabhupada explains on the bottom that this book is printed in 12-point type, times type, and by Sri Kansiram of New OK Press. We had discussed that in earlier classes, how Prabhupada chose the printer, because this printer had 12-point font. Now, Prabhupada gives a description here of what you're going to find inside of the book. Prabhupada decided that because Chaitanya Mahaprabhu considered the Bhagavad Purana, the Amala Purana, the most important of all the Puranas, the first thing he wanted to do was do a biographical sketch of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's life and how he is the living example of Srimad Bhagavatam. So first you have a short life sketch of Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the ideal preacher of Bhagavad Dharma, then the original Sanskrit text, Roman translation, English synonyms, English translation, and elaborate purports by A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami. And Prabhupada was still under the registered society of the League of Devotees at that time. Prabhupada started out trying to sell his book for 100 rupees. No one would buy it. He reduced it to 51 rupees, then 36 rupees, then 24 rupees. Finally, 16 rupees. You could get this book. Next comes the dedication, which is the same dedication that you'll find in all of Prabhupada's Srimad Bhagavatams to this day. This Bhagavad Purana is as brilliant as the sun, and it has arisen just after the departure of Lord Krishna to his own abode, accompanied by religion, knowledge, etc. Persons who have lost their vision due to the dense darkness of ignorance in the age of Kali shall get light from this Purana. And Prabhupada chose this sloka. This sloka we'll find in this first volume because it's the third chapter of the first skanda. Now Prabhupada begins his preface. And this preface also you'll find to this day in all of the Srimad Bhagavatam volumes. So you can read that yourself. Now Prabhupada has a long introduction. He didn't just write introduction, chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3. No, he gave a general description of what the subject is every few pages. Very helpful. And it also entices a person to read because, oh, that's very interesting. I wanted to know about that. And then that way it makes you want to read more and more. Now, at the very bottom of this introduction, there's something that Prabhupada calls the Sanskrit text of the first chapter inserted. Because when Prabhupada first started writing, here are the 2 pages, he didn't include the Devanagari. He just went on to the transliteration of the first 23 slokas. But the scholars who were actually the people who were going to read these books, they wanted the Devanagari. So he put it at the front of the book for the scholars' sake. And then after verse 23, Prabhupada included all the Devanagari shlokas. So for instance, this is how Prabhupada started. This is text 1, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. The Devanagari wasn't there. So that way the scholars could refer to the original Devanagari on those 2 pages. Now unfortunately what Vishal did was he underlined most of the book. So I only took a few pictures of these pages. Now, after 23 onwards, Prabhupada included the Devanagari. That's part 1. Now, second part. It took Prabhupada another 2 years to prepare the part 2. Now, Prabhupada's plan was, there were 18,000 slokas in Srimad Bhagavatam. And he wanted each volume to have 400 pages. So he was only able to do, I think, the first 7 chapters in the first volume. And therefore, he estimated that Srimad Bhagavatam was going to take 60 volumes. Now we have it only in 18 volumes, but before there were many, many more volumes because we only printed 400 pages at a time. Now we squeeze the whole canto into one huge volume, because it's easier to print now than it was in those days. So this is part 2. And now, after this part 2, Prabhupada has gotten many appreciations, and he's included them. Now, the first appreciation, first Prabhupada gives an appreciation. I'm obliged to Sri Hanuman Prasad Podar of the Gita Press and Kalyan fame. I'm sure we've all seen the Kalyan magazines of Gita Press, who has gone through my work and appreciating the endeavor has helped through the Dalmia Jain Trust to meet part expenditure of this publication. So this is when everything starts to fit together, because Charan Sharma, who was the son of Krishna Chandra Sharma here in Vrindavan, he was the personal secretary of the Dalmias. And he knew that the Dalmias would not give money to Prabhupada for printing his books unless he was recommended. So he sent Prabhupada to Hanuman Prasad Podar. Hanuman Prasad Podar has written a wonderful appreciation, and with this appreciation, this second canto, this second volume, was printed with the donation from the Dalmia Trust. So Prabhupada had to go through a lot, but it worked out in the long run because he was getting genuine appreciation. So Hanuman Prasad Podar writes, first of all, I should happily acknowledge receipt of the great book Srimad Bhagavatam, first volume, and I warmly thank you for sending the above. Secondly, it is a source of great pleasure for me that a long-cherished dream has materialized and is going to be materialized with this and the would-be publications, because this is the first time Srimad Bhagavatam was ever translated into English. And it was the desire of many great acharyas and preachers that the whole world could learn these secrets of the Vedas. It was the world language at the time. The British Empire was the most powerful in the world at that time. So English was the international language. I thank the Lord that due to His grace, this publication could see the light. I again thank you for the rich gift with salutation to Sri Hari, yours obediently, Hanuman Prasad Podar. Now, Prabhupada, he writes more gratitude. They're writing appreciations and Prabhupada's writing appreciations to them. Of course, we are grateful to the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the central government of India for purchasing some copies and then distribute them to the great institutions, universities, etc., both in India and abroad. So by this time, just by Prabhupada's first volume, he was getting government orders. It's just amazing. Because, yes, they wanted this culture of Vedic knowledge to be spread all over the world. So the government now was helping Prabhupada. The Director of Education has also recommended this publication as library copies in educational institutions, and they are also purchasing the copies. So there are a few other appreciations. I just listed them. Dr. P. Nagaraja Rao of the Bhavan Journal, Bombay Bhavan Journal. We read about Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan, and their journal is called Bhavan Journal. And he had written a biography of Dr. Radhakrishnan. So he was a very great scholar, and he gave his appreciation. The Vice President of India, Dr. Zakir Hussain, the Governor of Uttar Pradesh, Vishwanath Das, and then the Economic Review, they gave a book review in their publication. Then Prabhupada got from Ban Maharaj and Bhakti Saranga Goswami, because they were two big leaders in the Gaudiya Vaishnava societies. Now this is, and Prabhupada included this in his Bhagavatam, this is the order from the Ministry of Education. They purchased 50 copies of Prabhupada's Srimad Bhagavatam. And they had Prabhupada mail these 50 copies to each of the institutions. They gave a whole list of which universities they wanted the Bhagavatams mailed to, and they paid for all of that. Now, this chapter is called This Momentous Hour of Need. Where did that come from? So in this second volume, Prabhupada put what he called the motto. It is admitted even in the higher circle that in fact, the whole root and background of Indian culture is wrapped in the Sanskrit language. And we know that the foreign invaders of India could break down some of the monumental architectural work in India, but they were unable to break up the perfect ideals of human civilization, so far kept hidden within the Sanskrit language of Vedic wisdom. Srimad Bhagavatam is the mature, ripened fruit of the tree of Vedic literature. And then page 66, that's of the first volume. Because, see, every time Prabhupada wrote a volume, he would stop at page 400 or 453, whatever it was. The next volume, he would start from 454, so it was all continuous. So page 66 is of the first volume. We have just begun to give it rendered into English with broader outlook, and it is the duty of the leading Indians to spread up the culture all over the world at this momentous hour of need. So this was Prabhupada's motto, that all Indians should take up this preaching work at this momentous hour of need. And this is where the title of this chapter comes from, that Satsvarup Maharaj entitled it. Now, I'm just giving a sample here of a full page, and this format has been continued now to this day with the text number, the Sanskrit, transliteration, English synonyms, translations, and then purport. And practically everything is the same. The editing work that was done, what happened was, sometimes Prabhupada's English was not understandable because Indian English, British English, American English, Australian English, they're all slightly different. Just like we have so many different dialects of Hindi here. So when Prabhupada wanted these books reprinted in America for the first time, he had Dr. Howard Wheeler, who was an English professor at a university, and one of his first disciples, Hayagriva Das, do the editing. And he was doing it on a very scholastic level, according to what the scholars outside of India would understand. So he didn't change anything. He simply made it a level of English that was understandable outside of India. And most of that translation, the editing work, has been continued. Now, later editors left things out because they couldn't understand Prabhupada's, when he was dictating, they couldn't understand what Prabhupada was saying sometimes, and Prabhupada would notice the mistakes. So he had his editor at that time, Jayadvaita Swami, go back to the original tapes, go back to the original transcriptions, that means typing on the typewriter, and see where the mistakes were. And that was as much editing that Jayadvaita Swami did. So now we have, again, the list of Prabhupada's books that he would put at the front of all of his books. And questions were asked last week also. We're always wondering, where are some of these books, like Practical Theism, Message of Godhead now was printed. But there was an article written by, we all know Brahmananda, he used to live here. So in 1970, Srila Prabhupada awarded Brahmananda with sannyas. So for most of us, we knew Brahmananda as Brahmananda Swami. He was awarded sannyas, and then Prabhupada sent him first to Pakistan. He went to West Pakistan, and then he was sent to Africa to open up the whole continent of Africa. So he had a huge responsibilities. He was also Prabhupada's favorite secretary. Prabhupada liked him to travel with him. And we used to have a lot of exchange with him because many of the times when Prabhupada was here in Vrindavan, Brahmananda Swami was his secretary. He was a very good chokidar also. No one could get near Prabhupada unless Brahmananda allowed them to. So this was part of an article that Brahmananda wrote about Prabhupada's missing books. For more than 5 years, Srila Prabhupada lived and worked alone in the Radha Damodar temple because we didn't know that time about Chippiwada. We didn't realize how much time Prabhupada spent between the two places. So in 1973, according to the devotees, Prabhupada lived full-time in Radha Damodar without our knowing that he spent so much time in Delhi. From the volume of manuscripts and letters he left behind, it is evident that he was constantly writing. He wrote by hand in notebooks, in school lesson pads, that's the little copybooks, and even on the reverse side of mimeographed news releases from the Soviet news agency, which was located in nearby Delhi. Another thing that Prabhupada used to do was, when he would get letters, the envelopes, he would take them apart, and on the inside was blank paper, and he would write on that blank paper. We used to also do that, following in Prabhupada's examples. We would type, because everything was on typewriter, so if we ever wanted to make copies, we'd have to use carbon paper, and we would use that for our carbon copies, so without having to waste paper. These releases during the early 1960s were filled with reports of Sputnik achievements, and it was these reports that probably prompted Srila Prabhupada to write the most famous of his shorter books, Easy Journey to Other Planets. So now we know how Prabhupada knew about the Sputnik achievements, because Prabhupada says that the communists, just like the Marxists in what are they called? In the Naxalites in Bengal, because the communists would profusely hand out free literature. So Prabhupada would get this free literature and he'd turn it around and type on the back sides of the paper. But at the same time he would read their news. So therefore he learned about the Sputniks and then wrote Easy Journey to Other Planets. Many of these Radha Damodar manuscripts are incomplete and as yet unpublished. We have one unpublished one in Prabhupada's hallway. It's called Perfection at Home, with Prabhupada's notes on the side. They include Science of Devotion, Practical Theism, Message of Godhead, Prayers of King Kulashekar. Now, we have a book here called the Prayers of King Kulashekar, but if you ever read it, you'll find out that Prabhupada only did the first few slokas, and then he stopped because that was as much as the manuscript we had of Prabhupada's. And then after Prabhupada disappeared, the GBC asked Satsru Maharaj and the translators, like Gopi Puranadana and others, to complete the prayers. So a portion of the book was written by Prabhupada, and those slokas he put into his Back to Godhead magazines, and the remainder was completed by Prabhupada's disciples. And a lengthy verse-to-verse translation and purport of the first part of Chaitanya Charitamrita. So this also were the books that Prabhupada put in his Back to Godheads. Also there is Srila Prabhupada's voluminous correspondence addressed to many prominent men in the fields of religion, letters, politics, business, and medicine. These letters reveal Srila Prabhupada's gift for soliciting people to help spread scientific knowledge of God consciousness. So these, when we read it, we heard about when Prabhupada gave Gurudas the key to his rooms at Radha Damodar. And then Gurudas was able to collect all these manuscripts, preserve them. Some of them were stolen. We have one book that was stolen. It's called the Ramananda Sambad. One of Prabhupada's disciples who was just here, Guru Kripa Prabhu, he gave me a copy of that. And I have it here, and we're just making arrangements now with the BBT to have that book printed. Because some devotees thought that it was nice to have souvenirs of Srila Prabhupada, and they would actually steal his things. Now we come to the third part. Third part, in 1 year, Prabhupada completed the third part, 1965. Because he got his passport, he got his sponsorship, he had his free ticket, he only needed his P form, and Prabhupada wanted to go, so he quickly did the third volume. Again, only 16 rupees. And here's the end of it. End of the first canto, Srimad Bhagavatam, volume 3. And Prabhupada puts at the bottom, the first volume was printed 1962, the second 1964, and now this third one, 1965. And then Prabhupada put these books, 200 sets, he put into trunks, and he put those trunks, they were sent from Bombay to Cochin, and Prabhupada, he went to Calcutta in August of 1965. He boarded the Jaladuta. The Jaladuta went around to Cochin, and Prabhupada saw his trunks loaded onto the Jaladuta that he took to America with him. Okay, so now we'll start today's reading. At Chippiwada, Bhaktivedanta Swami followed much the same daily schedule as at Keshigat, except that with Krishna Pandit doing some of the secretarial work for Back to Godhead, he was free to devote more hours to Srimad Bhagavatam, because Prabhupada had subscribers, 2 rupees per year. So he would have to send his Back to Godheads to all of his subscribers. So Sri Krishna Pandit would help him with that type of work. Krishna Pandit is now remembering. He used to translate Srimad Bhagavatam before dawn, about 3 a.m. In the beginning, there was no typewriter, but then he arranged a portable typewriter. He would do his daily work and then cook his food himself. I arranged raw materials for his cooking. Sometimes he used to come to my family asking my wife to get some food. Sometimes he would also bathe at 5 or 6 in the afternoon. Prabhupada never used hot water. And Prabhupada, one time Prabhupada was sick here, it was 1974. And there were so many cooks here trying to cook for Prabhupada. He couldn't eat. It was the time when the temple was supposed to be open, and then Prabhupada saw that it wasn't ready, and he became very depressed. He became sick. So he decided that he would cook for himself, because he said, a person likes whatever they cook, no matter what garbage it is. So if you cook for yourself, you'll eat it because you're cooking exactly what you want. So he didn't cook for himself. Instead, Pishima was cooking for him, and then his disciple Palika was cooking for him. But he told his servant that, and his servant, I think his servant, yes, Shruta Kirti told me that, because I was there in the kitchen also. So that no matter what you cook for yourself, you'll eat it. Every day he was typing, and he himself was reading some Bhagavatam, and he was going down in the temple for darshan. Also, Prabhupada would perform the 7 o'clock evening darshan for Radha Ballabh. Then he was going outside and sometimes returning at 2 or 4 in the afternoon. Then he was typing and sending the proofs of Back to Godhead to a place, that was the OK Press, and checking them. He was doing by hand all this type of work. His main activity was typing many hours a day. Bhaktivedanta Swami worked from a Sanskrit and Bengali Bhagavatam. Those are the pictures that we saw. That's why I did all of that before we read. Edited by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, and a large book containing the original commentaries of 12 great acharyas. Well, I could only find 4 or 5, but maybe there are 12 in other ones. He had a standard format. He made a Roman transliteration of the Sanskrit Devanagari script, then word for word English synonyms, an English prose translation, and finally his English purport on that verse. Before writing his own purport, however, he would consult the commentaries of the acharyas, especially Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, Jiva Goswami, Vijayadwaja Tirtha, and Sridhar Swami. So that's why there were 12 different commentators, because not every commentator gave a purport to every single sloka. So for instance, the page that I picked out did not have Vijayadwaja Tirtha's commentaries. That's Madhvacharya's follower. So even in the Krama Sandarbha of Jiva Goswami, he would not give a purport for every single sloka, but he would give a summary that would be put into the Krama Sandarbha. He contemplated the size of the project he was attempting. The Bhagavatam contained 18,000 verses. The first canto's 17 chapters would fill 3 volumes of 400 pages each. And the second canto, with 10 chapters, would take 2 volumes. So Prabhupada only printed the first canto in India. And then, when he came to America, he wanted the second canto printed. So we had at that time, the BBT didn't yet exist until 1972. And Prabhupada, this was around 1970 when Prabhupada was ready to print the second canto. And there were 10 chapters in the second canto. So what Prabhupada had us do was, in New York we had the ISKCON Press, and we had the typists, the transcribers, we had the Sanskrit department, we had the artists, we had the photography department. Everything was there, all in one house, in one building, on a place called Tiffany Place. So as each chapter was ready, and in those days, see, before computers, everything had to be done by hand. We would type it, lay it out, and then we'd have to cut out the paper and paste it onto another paper. And everything had to be pasted like that, every single page. And then as each page was pasted properly with all the things in it, then we would take that page to the photography department. They would snap a picture of that page, and that's what would get printed. So it was nothing like what's done now here, which is so easy with the computers. It took 50 devotees to print that one, to get that one page ready. So that's what was going on. So because it took so much time with all the devotees doing their work, Prabhupada decided we would print one chapter at a time. So there were little books. One was called The Lord in the Heart. One was, I forget what all the names were, but each chapter had a different name according to what Prabhupada named the chapters. And those would be little books that we would distribute. And that was how, at first, the second canto was printed. Then finally, and the original copy you'll see in Prabhupada's house, the cover of it is one of the original deities that Prabhupada installed. It's the Radha Krishna deities at the New York temple, because everything was going on in New York at that time when it came to printing. It wasn't until 1975 that Prabhupada transferred, no more ISKCON Press, everything was transferred to Los Angeles. They had a huge building, and by that time they had some computerized system, so things went much faster, and they had so many rooms, and everything was very nicely organized there in Los Angeles. But in New York it was quite rustic. There were 12 cantos, and so the total would be at least 60 volumes. He thought he might be able to finish it in 5 to 7 years. Now Prabhupada's saying, if the Lord keeps me physically fit, then in the fulfillment of Srila Prabhupada's, meaning Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, by Srila Prabhupada's will, I could complete this work. This is why Prabhupada, after he would spend the whole day starting with chanting Gayatri, going out on his morning walk, coming back, giving Srimad Bhagavatam class, greeting the deities, wherever he was, it was the exact same program. Then in the morning he would take his breakfast, then he would maybe nap for 20 minutes, then he would meet with his managers, do his correspondence, have his massage, then have his bath, then take his lunch, then rest for a little while, then he would have either fruit or juice at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Then again he would meet with his managers, or he would take a tour of the temples and see what was going on. Sometimes just in the middle of nowhere you'd see Prabhupada walking by here looking to see how everything was going on, pointing out what had to be corrected and what had to be fixed. He'd notice if the lights were on, he would notice if the water taps were loose, all the little details. So, and then again in the evening, at 6 o'clock, he would have darshan, public darshan in his rooms. 7 o'clock would be artik, and then Bhagavad Gita class in the temple. And then 9 o'clock, Prabhupada would come back. He would have milk and a little snack. He would rest for 2 hours. And then again, 1 o'clock in the morning, when all of the devotees were sound asleep, Prabhupada would get up at 1 o'clock in the morning, and from 1 o'clock to 4 o'clock, that's when Prabhupada would do his writing work, when all of his children were sleeping. So Prabhupada, he was just determined. He wanted to get this Srimad Bhagavatam complete in this lifetime. He decided to introduce the first volume with the biographical sketch of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the ideal preacher of the Bhagavatam. So now we've seen all these things, we can understand, because we're not going to take those books out again, because we don't want the paper to get destroyed. The reader could best appreciate the Bhagavatam by seeing its practical demonstration in the life of Lord Chaitanya. The special feature of Lord Chaitanya's presentation had been his desire that Srimad Bhagavatam be preached in every nook and corner of the world by everyone who happens to take his birth in India. Now, it was even more difficult in the time of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. There wasn't paper, they only had palm leaves. And if they wanted a book, they had to handwrite the book onto the palm leaves. And that was how, you can go to the Research Institute, that was how you would read Srimad Bhagavatam, from the palm leaves. Like, for instance, Gadadhar Pandit. He had palm leaf Bhagavatam, but when he was reading his Bhagavatams, he used to cry, and his tears would go onto the palm leaves, and the ink would get washed away. So when, I think it was Srinivasacharya, when he was sent to study Bhagavatam under Gadadhar Pandit, he couldn't read his Bhagavatam anymore because of his tears. So a new Bhagavatam had to be written. And by that time he left the world, and I believe it was Srinivasacharya, he wasn't able to learn Bhagavatam from Gadadhar Pandit. So it was even more difficult 400, 500 years ago. Lord Chaitanya had called Srimad Bhagavatam the spotless Purana, and had considered the chanting and hearing of Srimad Bhagavatam along with the Hare Krishna mantra to be a complete scientific process for developing pure love of God. Working from Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's commentary on Chaitanya Charitamrita and Chaitanya Bhagavat, Bhaktivedanta Swami gave a 50-page synopsis of Lord Chaitanya's life and his Sankirtan movement. He described Lord Chaitanya's divine ecstasies, his philosophical confrontations with leading scholars of the day, and his inauguration of the Sankirtan movement, the congregational chanting of the holy name. Bhaktivedanta Swami especially connected Lord Chaitanya's life and teachings to what he saw as the present crucial time in history. Help for humanity in the motto, this momentous hour of need, lay in the Vedic literature, and especially in Srimad Bhagavatam. Now here's what, now Prabhupada is quoting here what we saw. We know that the foreign invaders of India could break down some of the monumental architectural work in India, but they were unable to break up the perfect ideals of human civilization so far kept hidden within the Sanskrit language of Vedic wisdom. The Sanskrit language had protected the secret for thousands of centuries, but now the secret had to be released to the world. As he approached the first verses of Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhaktivedanta Swami became absorbed in the Bhagavatam's purpose. The verses stressed that the Bhagavatam alone could save society from the evil influences of the age of Kali. Srimad Bhagavatam's recommendation for this age was simply to hear from the pure devotees about the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. So because Prabhupada, he was racing against time, and he had so many different aspects of the society to develop, particularly in the first volume of the Srimad Bhagavatam, he put all the information that was needed for us to become fully Krishna conscious. And that was why he wanted to give that 50-page biographical sketch of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, because at that time, although he was just doing a few slokas of the Chaitanya Charitamrita, he didn't know if he would have time to be able to translate the entire Chaitanya Charitamrita. So that first volume has the topmost knowledge that Prabhupada included within those pages. So thank you very much. Hare Krishna. Jai.